What if Red Dead Redemption had a forgotten ancestor? Not an official prequel, but a spiritual one. A version of the Wild West so idolized, so mythical, that could only exist in comic panels and an obscure 2001 PC game called Lucky Luke: Western Fever. But who is Lucky Luke? What is Western Fever? And why would you call it Red Dead Redemption 0? Let me explain. First, you need to understand who Lucky Luke actually is. He's a character born in 1946, created by a Belgian cartoonist Maurice. He has spent years traveling across the actual United States, right after World War II, and he brought that real landscape and atmosphere back into the comic panels. He first drew Lucky Luke for a comic magazine called Spirou, and this was right after World War II, a time when comic books were exploding in popularity. Then in 1955, a legendary writer, Rennie Goscinny, who was the co-creator of Asterix, joined the series. Together, Maurice and Goscinny built Lucky Luke into one of the best-selling comic series in the world, with hundreds of millions of copies sold across dozens of languages. So, who is Lucky Luke really? He's known as the man who shoots faster than his own shadow, and that line alone tells you everything about the tone of the universe. Almost like a tall tale you would hear around the campfire, while also talking about legendary Arthur Morgan. But here's the interesting part. Lucky Luke lives in a classic Wild West with cowboys, outlaws, sheriffs, train robberies, everything, all the ingredients you would expect from Wild West. But the difference is how he handles them. Because Lucky Luke almost never kills anyone. Instead, he shoots the gun out of the villain's hand. He's calm, clever, a bit sarcastic, and always one step ahead. Even his horse, Jolly Jumper, is smarter than most humans in the story and talks back to Lucky Luke constantly. And there are his enemies, the Dalton brothers, Joe, William, Jack and Averill Dalton. They are loosely based on a real historical outlaw gang, but in the comics they're turned into something else entirely. Loud and endlessly scheming criminals who keep escaping prison and keep getting caught again by Luke. They are dangerous on paper, but in practice they are almost comedic villains. The Wild West is a chaos, but chaos you can laugh at. But moving on, it's time to talk about the game itself, before we make a Red Dead game connection. In 2001, Lucky Luke got his own video game, Lucky Luke: Western Fever, released on both PC and PlayStation. The plot of this game is simple. A Native American medicine man named Snakefoot had been kidnapped by a gang of outlaws, and Lucky Luke has to rescue him. It's a straightforward set matching the comic style exactly. Gameplay-wise, this game is not an open-world adventure. It's a rail shooter with puzzle elements, and Lucky Luke moves automatically along a fixed path through the 3D Wild West environments, while the player aims and shoots bandits, dodges incoming bullets and reloads their gun. Along the way, there are also some small puzzles to solve too, which slows the pace down and adds some variety to the game. It's not technically an advanced game, and by today's standards it may feel quite repetitive. But what it did well was the atmosphere. It had dusty towns, big canyons, old saloons, all built to feel like they were pulled directly out of comic pages. For fans who grew up reading the books, that alone made the game memorable, and it's exactly why people still talk about it decades later, even though it's far from a technical masterpiece. And here is exactly why would I call it Red Dead Redemption 0. One fact and one idea. The fact: Lucky Luke: Western Fever came out in 2001, 9 years before Red Dead Redemption, and 3 years before the Red Dead Revolver. This cowboy was on our screens first. Then there is the idea. Red Dead Redemption 2 already proved this franchise is comfortable telling its story backwards as a prequel, and Lucky Luke pushes that logic one step further back, past the plot all the way to the myth itself. He's the clean, legendary gunslinger before Red Dead Redemption shows us what the legend actually cost the man living it. Now picture one thing for a second. Line up every version of a Wild West you know on one single timeline. On one end, you have Red Dead Redemption 2, set in 1899, and Red Dead Redemption, set in 1911. both showing the Wild West story already closing. Literally the last outlaws running out of road. Now, walk backwards on the same timeline. Walk all the way to the earlier point. Lawless Wild West full of gold rushes and legends still being written. That's the era Lucky Luke world lives in. Not a sequel to Red Dead, not a spin-off. A chapter that would sit all the way before it on the exact same imaginary timeline. So you see, Red Dead Redemption through characters like John and Arthur Morgan shows the West as it was probably like near its end. Violent, exhausting and closing in fast. It's the history version, and Lucky Luke shows the Wild West at its legendary peak. The version people told stories about long after the real history faded. If Arthur Morgan represents what the West probably felt like to live through, Lucky Luke represents what the West sounds like in the campfire stories that came after. Even the villains line up in an interesting way. The Dalton brothers, that are chaotic, incompetent and always causing trouble, feel like a comedic mirror of the gangs in Red Dead Redemption, like Vanderlyn Gang or the O'Driscolls. Both are groups on the edge of collapse. One collapses into tragedy and the other collapses into comedy. And there's the legend of the gunslinger. Lucky Luke's whole identity is built on the phrase "faster than his own shadow", a reputation and a myth about his skill that follows him everywhere. Red Dead Redemption plays with the same idea through its honor and reputation systems. You are a legend as a gunslinger, and the legend follows you. It shapes how people treat you, whether you want it or not. These games have a different tone, yes, but they have the same core idea. In Wild West, your reputation, your whole story, it becomes bigger than you. So here's the real question this whole comparison leaves us with. Which version of the Wild West is more true? And honestly, neither one, and honestly, both. Red Dead Redemption gives us the history and the West as it probably felt to actually live through right near the end, and when the myth was already dying. But Lucky Luke gives us the beginning of the same myth, the earlier point on the timeline, and the legend still being written, brave and funny, and impossibly skilled. That's really the whole point of calling this a Red Dead Redemption Zero. It's not a copy, it's not a rival, it's a starting point on a timeline. On the end of the imaginary timeline, you have Red Dead Redemption. On the other end, on the beginning, further back, you have a cowboy whose reputation is still clean. He's faster than his own shadow, and still somehow he is the good guy. Two halves of the same myth standing on the opposite sides of the road. So maybe that's the best reason to give a strange little rail shooter from 2001 one more look. Not because it competes with Red Dead Redemption, it doesn't, but because on the same timeline, inside the same myth, it might be exactly where the story begins, which Red Dead Redemption would later tell in a very different